All right, parents, here we go again. It's the Ask Dr. Tony episode. This is the Experience Miracles podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Tony Ebel, an expert in pediatrics, neurodevelopmental disorders, and drug-free, nervous system-focused healthcare. On this weekly episode, I'll be addressing the top questions on every parent's mind. If there's one thing we love and welcome, it's parents who never stop learning, asking the hard questions, and advocating for your kiddos like none other. So get ready for some real talk, real-life clinical and parenting experience, and real easy to understand answers that will help your family take action and get to that next level of health and healing. You ask, I answer. Let's dive into today's episode. The job of a parent is never ending, always changing. And while we get through the infant stage, the toddler stage, the grade school and middle school stage, and we think, you know what, it's got to ease up here soon. The truth is when we get to the teenage years, it gets harder in a lot of ways. Just like every season of being a parent, it also gets so awesome because it gets so new and so different. But one of the things that is hitting our teenagers, and honestly, unfortunately, it's hitting our grade schoolers and our middle schoolers as well at unheard of rates, is anxiety and mental, emotional health challenges, anxiety, depression, emotional dysregulation, flat out exhaustion, and just looking at our teens and looking at our kids and just knowing something's not right. Now, the truth is, this has been a problem for some time. We know that our teenagers go through a lot of different changes from their nervous system to their hormones to how their brain and body function. And we know that they go through a lot of challenges. School gets way harder. College and life on their own is upcoming. Friends and social circles can become so hard to navigate. And now today, we are really stuck in the thick of the storm. There's another ingredient to the perfect storm, if you will, called technology, smartphones, and social media, and just this 24/7, 365, and they'd probably plug in more if we let them, just addiction to technology, to the internet, and so forth. But the truth is, as far back as 2011, we've seen anxiety rates absolutely explode. They've doubled in that time. And then they grew again massively during the COVID lockdowns, where they took away, even though our kids weren't at risk from the challenge that was all over the news and everything else, they took them away from so many things that are essential to their well-being. So we saw another spike in anxiety, depression, suicide rates during those years. So right now, today, we are up against it. The CDC reports that 44%, so almost half of our high schoolers, report persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness, and 1 in 3 teenage girls have seriously contemplated suicide, twice the rate of boys. I have a whole bunch more statistics here on my notes and go through with this message, and I don't really want to. What I want to do is to get deeper into the conversation than medical doctors, psychologists, counselors, and perhaps even those in the awesome natural health, drug-free space go into when they talk about diet changes or detoxes or fitness. We know those things are essential. We also know that our kids tend to eat like crap when they are a teenager. We know that our teens, especially if they're not involved maybe in youth sports and so forth, they tend to become way too locked inside, sedentary, and then stuck on the phone. It all kind of comes together. So there's a lot of very basic things we can do to get our teens and our young ones healthy again. But what if you've already tried those? What if your teen is so dysregulated, so out of balance, so anxious, so depressed, and so exhausted that even kind of the basics of good health, getting good sleep, being physically active, getting outside, going to hang out with friends, being communicative and social, what if those basics, you can't get your teen to get even jump started because they're so exhausted? Now, what about this too? What if you've tried medications? What if your child has struggled so much that you needed to just help get their head above water and tried anxiety medications, tried these different psychoactive, psychotropic medications, and maybe they awesomely helped symptomatically. Maybe some of the symptoms that your child is going through are a little bit or a lot of bit better with medication. But those come with so many side effects, and they also come with such a risk of dependency. Is that really what our kids need to be healthy and happy and vibrant? Is a dependency and an addiction to the pharmaceutical industry? We know that those medications symptomatically can make some improvements, but we also know they come with both short and long-term side effect profiles and lots of risk. And the truth is, what we really want to break down with this message is the chemical imbalance theory that the traditional medical system, and really therefore, because they've marketed it to us and sold it to us, that, hey, anxiety, chemical imbalance, depression, and chemical imbalance, ADHD, chemical imbalance. So they've told us that our kids' brains and our brains work on whether we're happy and not anxious or not based upon these chemicals, the serotonins, the dopamines, and so forth. But let's dive deeper into those chemicals. Is the human brain and nervous system really dependent upon chemistry, or is it more dependent upon the balance, the function, the regulation of the nervous system? See, those chemicals that they talk about within this chemical imbalance theory, which once you open the hood and you actually look at the research and the science on the chemical imbalance theory, the gig is up. It's not solid at all. It is very loosely constructed scientifically. And so many studies have shown that so many basic things like going out for a walk and just doing some really simple things absolutely beat the pants off so many of these medications. But those are not the clinical trials. Those are not the studies that you will hear in the doctor's office, because the doctor's office doesn't have a gym and a nutritional and a nervous system focused chiropractic component to it. The doctor's office is the direct portal to the pharmaceutical industry. So the only studies you're ever going to hear about are the ones that support their theory and sell their product. Now you're thinking, goodness gracious, that's how these natural health, nervous system focused chiropractors and they're going to take this hardline angle to it. No, like every single one of our messages, this is a very steeped in the latest. Here's the truth about the science. Here's how, and even more importantly than research, here's what we know about how neurophysiology and the human and teenager brain and body really works. And then even more importantly, here's what parents want today. Us, as this generation of parents, we understand that we want our kids to be healthy. We want them to not be anxious. We want them to not be depressed. We want them to be happy and thriving and in a good place. And we definitely do not want to rely on medications full of side effects and addictiveness to get there, okay? So we're not having a controversial conversation. We're having a scientific practice and parent-based experience conversation that says this chemical imbalance theory isn't all it's cracked up to be. So what's deeper than that? What goes below that? And so with the rest of this, I really want to break down the science for you as to what's really triggering anxiety, exhaustion, depression within your child's brain and nervous system. And that's actually where the answer lies, right smack in the center. The central and autonomic nervous system are the system that those chemicals, the serotonin, the dopamine, the hormones, the neurotransmitters, it's literally in the word neurotransmitter. Those chemicals simply transmit messages for the nervous system. So what we know is that our kids are exposed to more stress. And yes, that's a simple catch-all word, and we want this message to be simple. Our kids are more stuck in sympathetic fight or flight stress mode than any generation of kids have ever been. Their sympathetic fight or flight side of the nervous system is so running on overdrive throughout most of childhood. In fact, we can go back to what we call the perfect storm. Many of our teens, when we go deep into their case history, it was a high stress fertility and pregnancy journey. There's actually connections to anxiety and mental emotional challenges later on in life, as far back as the fertility and pregnancy, what's called the fetal development, when the brain and the nervous system were first developing. There's also strong clinical connections and scientific connections to birth trauma, birth interventions, forceps, vacuum, C-section, induction, injuring the brainstem physically, which is where so much of our nervous system balance and function or imbalance and dysfunction and dysregulation is coordinated by something called the vagus nerve and the brainstem, and we'll break that down here in a second as well. And then our kids are exposed to more toxins, more medications, more antibiotics, more corticosteroids, more over-the-counter medications, more toxins in our food, our diet, our environment than ever before. And those toxins get into the body, and guess what they do? They mimic a sympathetic fight or flight, anxiety-inducing effect. And then you add in the fourth component of the perfect storm, which is really hits teenagers once they get a smartphone. And that is the addiction to technology and the constant stimulation overstimulation and disconnection from what's actually healthy and good for the brain once they're stuck on the phone for even a few hours a day. And is it absolutely atrocious that our schools don't even take our kids' phones away? Yes, right now, that's a big issue. And thankfully, the science we're breaking down in this message is out there. And people and schools and different states and different districts are finally waking up and saying, if we really truly care about our teens, if we really want them to be healthy, we really want them to thrive, not just in school, but socially, emotionally, physically, physiologically, we got to take those dang phones away, at least give them breaks so their brain and nervous system can connect to what is healthy, what does regulate it, what does create balance. So we can go all the way back to long before they actually become a middle schooler, grade schooler, teenager, and the stressors and the pressures that come with that. And what we know when we break into the science and the case history of kids struggling with anxiety and depression is that they've been heading towards this imbalance and heading towards this challenge for quite some time, because nerves that fire together wired together. So that if they were a toddler who was wound up and impulsive all the time, if they had focus and hyperactivity challenges in school, if they had sensory overwhelm and sensory challenges as we go along, if they were sick a lot, they have gut issues and immune and inflammatory autoimmune challenges, that all disrupts brain function as well and nervous system function. And all of this adds up to these absolutely exploding rates of anxiety and depression in our teens. So the actual foundation and the root cause of anxiety and depression is an imbalance, dysfunction, and dysregulation within the nervous system. Another nerdy term, two more nerdy things we want to sneak into this one that really parents of teens need to know about. And again, don't be worried by the nerd terms here coming up. I'll teach them in a very simple and easy to understand way. But there's another term called dysautonomia. Now, dysautonomia is also at play with another condition that is exploding in our teens called POTS. And POTS and anxiety and depression, all of this is linked together. So dysautonomia also then involves what's called the vagus nerve. Dysautonomia is the catch-all nerd term that says, okay, the entire autonomic nervous system, which controls not only our digestion, our respiration, our cardiac function, and all these kind of autopilot functions within the body, but we actually know that our autonomic nervous system and our vagus nerve are very intricately connected to our mental, emotional, and social health as well. And so dysautonomia simply means that the nervous system gets stuck in this fight or flight, sympathetic, protective, anxiety, hyperactivity response for too much. And if we're stuck on the gas pedal too much, too often, then our brake pedal, which is where we rest and sleep, we calm and regulate. The vagus nerve controls the brake pedal. It controls the parasympathetic system. So our teens have too much gas pedal, sympathetic fight or flight, and too little brake pedal. Now you may be thinking, my teen has no gas pedal left. My teen is constantly, all day, every day, exhausted. All they want to do is sleep. But yet they still are not rested. They still are not recharged. They are still not connected. Well, there's what's called final stage of this dysautonomia, sympathetic dominance, nervous system dysregulation. And a child and anybody's brain and nervous system can only run on the gas pedal 24/7, 365 for weeks, months, years. And it can only run on the gas pedal for so long before you run out of gas. And so the final stage of nervous system dysregulation is not just stress and anxiety, not just focus and just kind of trouble paying attention, which is kind of the second stage revolution of this nervous system dysfunction, but you get to that third stage, which is absolute neurological exhaustion. Okay. Now, the next thing I want to talk to you about is how do we find it? So we've talked about stats, we've talked about science, we've talked about the storm, we've talked about the sympathetic system. How do we find out if this is the actual real root cause challenge for your child? Well, here on the podcast, it's always so much more difficult because I can't show you any visuals. Now, if you go over to our YouTube, you can see a bunch of our videos where we'll actually pull out the iPad and we'll show you some of the graphics and the scans. Like for this right here, I'm going to talk about the insight scans. So the number one thing you need to do, I always find it interesting that medicine has blamed anxiety and depression on chemical imbalances, serotonin, dopamine, and so forth. And then where's the test? So just think of this for a second before I talk about HRV and the test we use to find the actual root cause of these challenges in your kiddo. We don't treat, we don't cure. So a lot of times in medicine, here's how it works. We go through the symptoms, then they run a test to find the actual levels of imbalance and dysfunction, and then they can have a quote unquote targeted treatment based upon the lab results, the MRI. So if a person will stick with kind of like generic regular chiropractic, back issues, disc issues, well, whether it's a chiropractor or an orthopedist, if we suspect someone has disc degeneration, well, we need to run some imaging. We need to run an x-ray. We need to have an MRI, and we need to actually measure the level of dysfunction within the disc, within the spine, to know what we're up against. Nobody would argue with that. That's black and white. That's how healthcare, that's how taking care of patients works if you're going to do a good job. Same with a shoulder injury. Somebody's got a shoulder injury. We really want to see what's going on. The labrum is torn, and we think, well, we better get an MRI. Same with cholesterol and freaking triglycerides. They don't just, actually, in most of the medical world, they would just be like, you know what? But they also make money off testing, so that's why they do that too. Okay, man, I'm really getting after it on this one, aren't I? Because I totally back off on other ones. But they run blood tests, right? Oh, you do have high cholesterol. Blood pressure. Put the cuff on. So it's just whack, all right? That's when I was a teen, maybe that's how we said it. I don't think they use the word whack anymore, speaking of teens, but they should. It's a good one, and it fits right here. It's absolutely lunatic, whacked out, crazy that they've sold this chemical imbalance theory, sold cajillions of dollars worth of anxiety and depression medications, and the science is so loosely constructed in the chemical imbalance theory, even if you're going to hang your hat on it, test it. Tell me exactly how low is my kid on serotonin. Tell me exactly how out of balance is their dopamine. And then after you give me the artificial serotonin dopamine fix, can you test it and make sure it's working? Are we back in range? So this is how the rest of medicine works. But for some reason, this department gets away without any actual testing to prove out their theory and track the results of their treatment. So I share that because it actually, one, it's a real issue that people are just, you know, unless you're really trained in this, it's hard sometimes to like dive as deep as we really want to. But once we share it with parents, like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. It's so half-assed over there. And then in the same breath, I want to be able to provide contrast and say, when I say, go get your kiddos insight scans, and especially if your child is struggling with anxiety and depression, you need to know everything about HRV, heart rate variability technology, and measuring dysautonomia, dysregulation, dysfunction, vagus nerve exhaustion. You got to find out if your child's sympathetic nervous system is too wound up. You got to find out if their parasympathetic regulation, rest, adaptability, resiliency side is shut down. And HRV technology is the most amazing technology that does that. Again, I can't show you an image here on the podcast, but as always, we'll put the links to our HRV articles and our insight scans connections on the website. You can go read about it and you can see the images there. So go to the show notes to learn more about HRV. But this is a test that really, really matters to find the root cause of these challenges. It's actually even the root cause of chemical imbalances. If the neuro system is imbalanced, the neurotransmitters are. So HRV is this incredible 3-minute, sometimes 5-minute at most exam that you really need to get for your teen if they're struggling with anxiety, depression, mental, emotional challenges. And I want you to fall in love with the idea of learning more about HRV technology, learning more about the nervous system, learning more about the vagus nerve, activating, stimulating the vagus nerve, and boosting the brake pedal, the resiliency, the regulation side of the nervous system is the answer to getting that sympathetic fight or flight anxiety kicking outside of the nervous system to chill out and calm down. So after you're done listening to this one, go to the show notes, go to our website, learn more about our clinical process, learn more about the insight scans, and especially HRV, and then check out our articles where we really link these conversations together, and the visuals will really come alive as well. If you haven't already, if you're a regular listener of the Experience Miracles podcast and you're not spending regular time on our website, pxdocs.com, and getting on our email newsletters, our webinars, our summits, my goodness, we have so much for you here. We'll keep pumping out these 2 episodes every single week with the podcast, but we have so much more awesomeness for you there on the website. Go check out HRV and learn all about the vagus nerve, anxiety, HRV, and how this all connects. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. Do you have a question that you would like to submit? Either send it to support@ at pxdocs.com with the subject Ask Dr. Tony, or head on over to our socials at pxdocs, where you can submit your question in our stories every single week. Every kid counts and every family counts, so let's leave no questions left unanswered. If you loved this episode and you want to help us reach more kids, we would so appreciate if you left a review and a rating on your favorite platform. God bless. Be well. We'll see you on the next one.